building a command line to-do application with Python and Typer. I'm Emmanuel, and I'll be your guide through this journey of creating an awesome Python command line application with Typer. Whether you're looking for another cool Python project to add to your portfolio or resume, or you want to enhance your practical Python skills for real-world problem solving, this hands-on learning course is for you. Together, you and I will explore the Typer library, and with it, build a cool, fully functional command line application for managing to-do items. Here is a peek at what you'll be building by the end of this course. A ready-to-use, fully functional to-do command line application. After items have been added to the database, you then have the ability to list and view the to-do items. With to-do items stored in the database, you'll have the ability to update the status of a to-do item using the complete command and the to-do items ID. Some key things you can expect to get by the end of this course include understanding how command line applications work, building fully functional to-do command line application with Typer, using Typer to add several commands, arguments, and options to your command line application, handling and processing JSON files using Python's JSON module, and adding and reading configuration settings using Python's config parser module. To get the most out of this course, you'll need to have general understanding of certain Python concepts. And up next, I'll show you some of those key concepts and where to get a refresher on them, or an introduction if you need one. In the last lesson, you had a taste of what you're going to be building and learning in this course. But before you proceed, it's important that you have the fundamentals of some of the concepts you're going to be using a lot in this course. Here is a list of some of the important ones. You can find this in the slide in the Additional Resources section. If you need a refresher, you can follow the links to the respective written tutorials or video courses, all provided here on RealPython. First, you're going to be using a lot of type hinting and annotation throughout this course, and this provides a link to RealPython's written tutorial and video course on Python type checking to get you started. Next, there will be a lot of object-oriented programming concepts throughout this course. And also in the slide, you find a link to tutorial and video course on RealPython's object-oriented programming. And finally, you will be working a lot with your systems path. And for that, you will be utilizing Python's built-in pathlib module. You can follow the link to the tutorial or video course on RealPython's guide to Python's pathlib module. Soon, you dive in to understand what command line applications are and then start to scope the features of your own command line application. But before you start building your own command line application, it's important that you understand what they are. Command line interface applications, also known as CLI applications, are programs that allow you to interact with a computer by typing commands into a terminal or command prompt. And just as in the name, command line applications require you to run them from a command line interface. You might already have been introduced to several command line applications or programs if you work in the shell or terminal on your machine. There are some command line utility programs already running on your machine. For example, in a bash or terminal, checking what current directory you're in using the pwd command is an example of a command line bash utility program already running on your machine. This prints out in the console the path to the directory you're currently in, or listing the files and directory in a location on your machine using the ls command. These command line programs often take arguments or options, which are just instructions you give to the program to run or execute specific functionalities. For example, the ls command can also take an optional -l option, and its function is to show more details about the directories and files in a given location. Let's talk about the features of the command line application that you're going to be building by the end of this course. Your command line application will have features to initialize a new to-do database to store the to-do items, add to-do items with priority value and a completion status, list and view all to-do items, update a to-do item's completion status, remove a single to-do item from the database, and finally, remove all to-do items from the database. To achieve these features, you will be able to pass certain commands to your command line application to execute certain operations. First is the init command to initialize your to-do application's database. Next is the add command. When ran and passed the description value and optionally a priority value, adds a new to-do item to the database. And then the list command. This command will fetch and list all the to-do items in your database. Next, the complete command. This command, when run and passed the to-do ID, sets a to-do item as completed. And then, the remove command. If run and passed an ID, removes a single to-do item from the database using its ID. And finally, the clear command. This command removes all the to-do items and clears the database. To achieve all these as the developer, it's important that you understand the architectural design that your program or software follows. For building this command line application, you will be following a model view controller architecture, also known as the MVC architecture. This is a design or architectural pattern used to separate an application into three main logical interconnected components or layers: the model, the view, and the controller. The model component in your application will be in charge of managing the application's data and business logic. This model component is also in charge of communicating back and forth with the database used to store your application's data. Next, the view component. This component is responsible for displaying the data to the user. This is usually the point of interaction between the application and the client or final user. Also, it's in charge of updating the interface based on changes that occur in the model. And then, the controller. This acts as an intermediary between the model and the view. It takes inputs from the user and based on those inputs, updates the model. Now that you know what architectural design your application is going to follow, next is to look at tools you would be using to build your final application. In this lesson, you'd explore the tools you'd need to build your Typer CLI application. First, the Typer library, which is the core component tool for building the command line application. Typer is a relatively new library built by the team that developed FastAPI. It is built on top of another CLI framework called Click. But Typer is infused with a few more functionalities to make it a bit more robust and user-friendly. And you and I will explore Typer in more details as you progress in the course. Next, you'll be using Python's built-in JSON module. This is to allow you to interact and work with JSON files, as you'll be storing your application's data in a JSON file. Next, Python's config parser module. A lot of applications, including your soon-to-be-built to-do CLI application, rely on several configuration settings, and defining configuration files and reading configuration settings can be done using this module. Up next, you'll proceed to get started in setting up the development environment for building your Typer CLI to-do application. Now that you understand what command line applications are and the tools you need to build your own, it's time to get started. You can work with any code editor of choice. I will be using Visual Studio Code, also known as VS Code, for the rest of this course. To get started, you can create your CLI application's project folder in any location of choice on your machine. I will be creating mine on my desktop and calling it rptodo_project. And once you've created your main project directory, it's time to open that directory in Visual Studio Code or your code editor of choice. Great. It's time to get started. For development, it's always a great idea to work in virtual environments. These are isolated environments that allow you to install project-specific dependencies that won't interfere with your global system installations. And to work with virtual environments in Python, you can work with Python's built-in venv module to create virtual environments. If you are on Linux or Mac OS, in your terminal you can run python 3-m venv./venv. You should see a directory called venv now in your project directory. To activate this virtual environment, if you are on Linux or Mac OS, you can run source venv /bin/activate. Running this should activate the virtual environment, and you should see an indicator in your terminal. In my case, now I see venv in parentheses. If you are in a Windows environment, this is the command to run to activate your virtual environment. You'd start with python -m venv and then the name of the environment, venv, to create the virtual environment called venv. And then to activate, venv /scripts /activate.bat. To confirm that you are indeed in your virtual environment, in your terminal, you can type which Python 3 to see what Python interpreter is going to be used when you execute programs with this virtual environment activated. And you should see the path to the Python 3 interpreter in your created virtual environment. Now, with this virtual environment activated, whatever package installation or program execution you're going to run is going to happen from your isolated virtual environment. Now that you have your virtual environment set up, let's look at the dependencies you're going to need to build your CLI application with Typer. Typer is the main dependency needed for this project. And to install it in your terminal, you would run the following command: python -m pip install Typer version 0.13.0. With Python virtual environments, to keep track of installed dependencies, you can store them in a file called requirements.txt. And to do that, you run the command python -m pip freeze // and the name of the file, requirements.txt. This will write out the installed dependencies into the requirements.txt file. Now to do that, in your terminal, first, confirm your virtual environment is activated to avoid installing the dependencies in your global environment. Then you can type python 3 -m pip install Typer == 0.13.0. This should install Typer as a dependency in your isolated virtual environment. And along with Typer, other needed sub-dependencies will get installed. Now, to capture all the installed dependencies into a requirements.txt file, in your terminal, run python 3 -m pip freeze // requirements.txt. This will create a requirements.txt file, and in there, write all the dependencies and sub-dependencies needed to build a Typer CLI application. To confirm this, in your virtual environment, you could run python 3 -m pip list. You would see that you now have all the dependencies and sub-dependencies installed in your virtual environment. Now, your development environment is fully ready to start working with Typer. Before building CLI apps with Typer, it's worth understanding the basics of Typer. That's what you get in this lesson, a Typer crash course, if you will. But if you already know the basics of Typer, you can skip this lesson and move to the next one, where you start creating the basic structure for your final to-do CLI application. You can start with creating a Hello World app with Typer. Now, in the current directory, create a file and call it main.py. And start by importing Typer. Then, you'll be defining a main function, def main. This function takes no argument for now. And then in there, you have typer.echo. Hello world. Finally, make the script executable by checking if $name equals quotes $main, and then running typer.run, passing it your main function, and you can save this file. And in your terminal, you can execute this by running python 3 main.py, and you should see Hello World printed in your console, confirming that your Typer CLI tool now works. This is a very basic Typer CLI application where all you're doing is echoing or printing out the text Hello World. Next, we'll be understanding arguments and options with command line applications and Typer. And to do that, you make your app a bit more interactive by adding arguments and options. In Typer and other command line applications, arguments are defined as function parameters which are required by default and are passed in a specific order to the command line application. And then CLI options, on the other hand, are optional parameters which often have default values as they're not always required. And they are parameters passed to the command line application with a specific name that starts with double dash or a single dash. Now, to see that in action, you start by changing your main function to a greet function and accept an argument, name, type annotated to signify that this accepts only string values, and then an age option, type annotated, to signify that it accepts only integer values. This will be a typer option, so you can accept a default value, setting that to 20. This right here is type hinting or annotation, and you would see a lot of it in this course. Type hinting or annotation is a way to specify the expected data types of variables, function arguments, and return values. Typer relies heavily on type hinting and annotation, and you're going to be using a lot of it throughout this course. Back to your function. You can change the typer.echo to now use this passed argument and option with fstring, say hello, using the name argument. You are, age option, years old. This is now a greet function that greets a user and tells them how old they are. Then you change your typer run command to take the greet function instead. Remember to save the file. Now, if you save and try to run this as is, like you did before, you should get an error saying missing argument name. That is because the name argument you've specified is required, and the program fails without it. To see exactly what your CLI requires, you can take advantage of the automatic documentation provided by Typer. To see this, you can run Python 3 main.py --help. And you should see details about your CLI application, the arguments, and the options. Now that you know this, you can run this again and pass the name argument, like say, Python 3 main.py and a name, Joe. You should get, hello Joe, you're 20 years old. This without passing any age parameter. This is because if the optional age parameter is not passed, it uses the default value you've set, which is 20. But you can also run and pass the age value with Python 3 main.py, Joe for name, --age, 30. And now you get, hello Joe, you are 30 years old, confirming the use of our argument and option. Finally, let's discuss CLI application commands. Typer allows you to create CLI programs with several commands. These commands are used to carry out certain named tasks and specific functions. An example of this, if you've ever worked with Git, is say git push. Git, in this case, will be installed as a CLI application, and then push is the command passed to carry out the git push function. Before creating apps with commands, you need to understand that Typer has basic and then explicit applications. What you've worked with or seen so far are basic Typer applications, which, under the hood, Typer actually converts into explicit applications for you. But if you want to start building more robust CLI applications that have several arguments, options, and commands, you'll need to use the explicit Typer application format. And to do that, instantiate a Typer app. So above your greet function, you can have app equals typer.typer. And you'll reference this as your main Typer app. When running the app under if name equals main, you can then call the app instead. Now, let's make your function a command. To do that, you would add a decorator on top of the greet function, like so. With this app.command decorator, Typer now makes this greet function a CLI command. One thing to note, by default, if you have just one single function and a single Typer command, Typer allows you to call the function just as you would in a basic Typer application, and things should work fine. I get the same result even though I've now introduced a new greet command. But when you start to have multiple commands in your application, I'll just add another command. Let's say death, goodbye, passing just a name argument. Again, making this a typer command. And this command, also using typer.echo, will just tell the user goodbye. If you run this like you did before, you will get an error, no such command, Joe, meaning that something is not right and you need to call the command. And to check what your application now requires, you can go back to the help documentation with Python 3 main.py --help. You should now see what your application needs, a list of all the available commands that you have, greet and goodbye. Now, if you run and call the greet command, Python 3 main.py greet Joe, age 30, you get, hello Joe, you're 30 years old. And now it works. If you need to alter the command name, for example, you wanted something shorter, you can pass an alias in the decorator. In this case, I want to change my goodbye command to just something shorter, like bye. And if you check the help again, you should now see the command name has been changed. And you can now call that command Python 3 instead of greet, Python 3 main.py by Joe, and you should have goodbye Joe. Great. You've got the basics of command line application and building them with typer. Next, you proceed to building your to-do command line application by first defining the project structure.